Although this is £75 billion, and although it takes our budget to 2.5% of GDP, this is a fraction of what it would cost if Putin were successful in Ukraine. There is no chance he would stop there, none. And others would look at this, autocrats elsewhere, and they would exploit the idea that all you have to do is outweight the West, and we'll get bored of it, some form of attention deficit, and we'll give up defending the things that we said we would never stop defending. And that, in the end, would cost us all a huge amount more.
In January this year, I made a speech at Lancaster House saying that we're living in a far more dangerous world. And today, I'm delighted to say we've announced that we will spend another £75 billion on our national defence. Now, that will take us to 2.5% GDP spent on defence. And I think it will send three important messages. One is to the defence industry. It's time to tool up. It's time to get ready for production. It sends a very important message to our adversaries who will know that we are serious about defending ourselves. And lastly, a very important message to our friends and allies who now know that 2.5% is the benchmark amount to spend on our national defence. I have to pay tribute to the Prime Minister for his leadership in the way that we've gone about raising our game, and this will make sure that Britain is secure in the world of the future.
That was the Right Honourable Grant Shapps talking about the newly increased amount of spending that they're doing for their national defence over there in the UK. This is a recognition that the world is no longer the peaceful, stable situation we were primarily experiencing in recent times. So the country is putting forth the effort now to up their defense game. A lot of these countries have been relying on the United States to have the equipment they need, and at the moment, it's clear that even the United States production capacity is currently idled to the point where they can't just immediately start sending equipment over, which is a problem for this situation. And it's a problem for our allies who now have to make sure their own industrial capacity is able to pick up the slack and move forward. Now, we are seeing many signs of this happening right now. The British have actually recently announced the Challenger 3. That's an entirely domestically produced upgrade to the Challenger 2. They've also announced several ships, a couple of submarines. They've announced a new infantry fighting vehicle, or armored personnel carrier, I should say. There's been a lot of indications that the Brits are taking this seriously. France appears to be spooling up their defense capabilities. Germany is already spooling theirs up. Poland is buying everything they can get their hands on. The Nammo factory over, and I think it's Norway or Sweden or somewhere right in there, is running flat out. And the countries have realized that, yes, they can try and rely on the United States for all of their defense capabilities, but in the end, they're going to have to start producing their own stuff too, because if the real war happens, if the real situation goes down, it's not enough by itself. They're going to have to actually be putting their money in. They've been riding on the U.S. coattails to a certain extent for many years. Now it's finally sunk in that they better start getting serious about it as well. Hi, Lucille. Hi, Jerry. Glad to see both of you here today. As you can see, we're getting just fired up right now. Just finished the intro video, and now we're going to continue on. And we have got a lot of things going on today. I take one day off to go do a job interview, and what happens, but everything happens. So let's go ahead and jump right into it and see what's going on. We'll start off with U.S. aid, which is kind of the big news over here. We'll back up to right after the House passed U.S. Aid for Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and some other related defense spending bills. Donald Trump actually came out and voiced support for Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, that after he allowed this military aid to go forward. It was a surprise for many people. Of course, we've already mentioned that it appears that multiple people have confirmed that Donald Trump was instrumental, or at least tacitly aware and tacitly approving the passage of aid to these other countries. How that happened, don't know, and I'm not going to speculate in that regard. I've got some stuff that I'm going to be going through at the very end after we've gone through all the Ukraine things that are talking about domestic U.S. politics for a little bit. But overall, we've got a situation where Donald Trump is supporting Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson needs Donald Trump's support at this point, or all heck is going to break loose for the Republican Party in the House. So with that done, the Senate actually passed that bill after, I believe it was about 20 some hours of delays being orchestrated by Senator Mike Lee, Senator Matt Gaetz. Nope, that's Senator Matt Gaetz. He's in the House. Sorry. Mike Lee, and so J.D. Vance, that's who I was thinking of right there, who all orchestrated as many opposition, much time in opposition as they could. They tried vigorously to stop it in every administrative way they could, and found that they were not able to overcome. Now, the way it was passed in the U.S. Senate was a little bit of a rules nightmare. They managed to make it so they wouldn't be able to actually amend the bill. They put them together as a package and passed all of them as a package deal instead of as individual bills. But in the end, 79 senators voted for, 18 opposed, and it passed over to Joe Biden's desk. Speaking of Joe Biden, he announced that he had already signed the foreign aid bill, making that the final step of the legislative process. And we have a short video that demonstrates that. At least it's only about 12 seconds here, but let's go ahead and fire it up.
We don't walk away from our allies. We stand with them. That's what it means to be the indispensable nation. That's what it means to be the world's superpower and the world's leading democracy.
And it's clear that this was a major moment for the Biden administration. He even announced that it would take only a few hours until the first shipments will be dispatched from the United States. This will include air defense munitions, rocket systems, and armored vehicles. I have a complete list we'll go through in just a moment here. Speaking of that complete list, RIM-7 and AIM-9 missiles for air defense, Stinger and anti-aircraft missiles, small arms and additional rounds of small arms ammunition, including 50 cals, additional ammunition for HIMARS, which is going to be the longer range variant of the missiles, though I expect that they'll also send the cluster munitions that we no longer can use that are in various stockpiles. 155 millimeter artillery rounds, they don't have a specific number. 105 millimeter artillery rounds, 60 millimeter mortar rounds, Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, and somebody somewhere said there were going to be like couple of hundred of these Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, but I don't know that for sure. It was a number that kept popping up, and I'm not sure I really know for sure what they're going to do on that. MRAPs, or mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles. Humvees, the old classic. Logistics support vehicles. Tactical vehicles to tow and haul equipment. Tow missiles, Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, precision aerial munitions, airfield support equipment, anti-armor mines, Claymore anti-personnel munitions, night vision devices, demolitions for obstacle clearing, spare parts, field equipment, training munitions, maintenance, and other ancillary equipment. Quite the $1 billion aid package that's rolling out the door right off the bat. Then this story just kind of snuck out there, and we kind of saw the results of this on the Zankoy airfield strike just the other day. The U.S. secretly shipped long-range ATACMS missiles to Ukraine, and Ukraine has already used them twice on Russian positions inside occupied Ukraine. So this is the official greenlit, moving those things out there, and so that's moving forward as it is. Now we're going to get them in bulk and in quantity now. Hi, Robbie. Glad to see you here. I have been seeing much the same information about Kharkiv and Sumy and the Russian troop buildup, but some people have been pointing out that it would be quite the trick to actually push into Kharkiv at this point in time. Sumy, I haven't gotten a good feel for it. I have to research that part of it. But I've been seeing much the same information kind of popping around, and I'm waiting for good confirmation, which, I mean, you've got friends that are actually probably more involved with it directly. So the ATACMS missiles that showed up here, this was a surprise for all of us in the public, but with the actual delivery of real numbers of these long-range missiles, it's already past the point where they got to keep it secret. So they talked about some of this, the operations that were done with those missiles, and they're going to continue on moving them forward. The other thing that kind of popped through was green lighting confiscating frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. It's a step in the right direction, says Timothy Ash, but not yet a game changer. And by the way, the Russian propagandists are livid. We'll be going through some of that in a bit here, too. President Zelensky addressed the fact that this aid package had passed. We will do everything to compensate for the 6 months that have passed in debate and doubt. It's going to take some work. The situation there is pretty. I wouldn't go so far as desperate, but it is definitely dire in some places with the lack of shells and equipment and ammunition. So even with a major lack on the side of Ukraine as far as artillery and ammunition, even so, Russia has not been able to effectively push through for much more than small, tiny gains. We'll go through that in a bit. There is a report that U.S. AI technology is being tested in Ukraine. This is Project Maven, and it's basically they're giving the image recognition systems the ability to go out, find their own targets, and then go and attack them once they've properly identified them. It worked pretty well, and then I think they started working on some counters where the image systems weren't able to quite keep up with the changes on the battlefield. Glad to see you as well, Tony. I'm looking forward to seeing I'm glad to have you all here already. So thank you for joining me, every one of you. The Ukraine channel on Twitter put out a video celebrating the aid package.
Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this.
We will stand with the Ukrainian people until victory is won.
Ukraine definitely knows how to strike the right notes when it comes to dealing with the United States. The Russians are absolutely up in arms over the aid package passing. They really seems like they didn't have a plan B if the United States came through, and really expected that the assistance package wouldn't make it through Congress. Even so, Solovyev here is screaming about these Americans stealing Russian taxpayers' money, as though the taxpayer would ever see that in Russia at all. But this is they're complaining about the fact that their assets are being confiscated because they started this war. Even Simonian here predicted that there would be more aid coming to Ukraine eventually. America will, of course, give money to Ukraine. Everyone approved, which was to be demonstrated. It was a little funny to listen to those who thought that they might not approve it. That the war would end because Ukraine had run out of everything and no one would give them anything else. They will give everything. They'll give as long as there's something to give, and there'll always be something to give. That's a Russian propagandist actually identifying the real problem, that is that America will always have something to give, and they'll always have more to give, because when the chips are down, the United States will support. The United States will turn on the faucets. They'll stand up the industry. They'll make it happen. And the question is, are the chips down? for Ukraine, they might be for right now, but they've got a good, solid ray of hope that's coming their way pretty darn quick here. By the way, there is reports that there was pre-positioned aid packages literally in Poland and Germany that were ready to literally just be rolled right across the border and into Ukraine and used. I don't have confirmation on that, so it's but I would easily see that being the case. Mitch McConnell gave a significant speech on aid to Ukraine, and he's made some good points here, as Anton Herashchenko points out. We got a significant number of European countries spending more as a percentage of GDP than we are. With regard to the claim that this was a huge amount of money, I know it seems like it, but to put the $60 billion in aid to Ukraine in context, it's about 0.2% of our GDP. 0.2%. Talking about the restrictions potentially on ATACMS, he said, I hope not. I wouldn't try to dictate to Ukrainians how to handle a war either. I would not put restrictions on it. Now, he doesn't have that choice, but understand, to see Mitch McConnell saying these things is significant. What would I say to the Ukrainians regarding our delay? I would say better late than never. Look, I would have loved to have gotten this finished a long time ago. I've been talking about this since last summer, if not before. It is not too late. This supplemental to Ukraine actually rescued us in the sense that it allowed us to build up our industrial base and to create lots and lots of jobs. And I'm going to make this point here I'm going to call it a happy side effect of a sad delay. Because the U.S. was not immediately passing their aid package to Ukraine, other countries started cranking up their production capacity. Other countries started spending more of their money to both expand their existing military industrial industries and to basically crank up their own ability to supply Ukraine. So now more countries will have more capabilities that are ramping up and moving forward instead of it all relying on the United States. Do I think the delay was a good thing? No. But it may have awakened some additional thought process in our allies for what they really need to do to support Ukraine in this war, to drive Russia back out of Ukraine. Then he made some comments that are more political in nature. I mean, anything he says is political, but still. My dad was fighting the Germans in World War II, and when the war came to an end, when he met the Russians in, not going to pronounce it, which is in the Czech Republic, and I have some letters he wrote my mother pointing out the Russians were going to be a big problem. And boy, have they been for a long time. And as we all know, there was some hope after the Berlin Wall came down. We thought maybe that Russia would be a normal country. Bush, the 43rd president, tried to treat them like a normal president. So did President Obama. But it is clear this is just like the Soviet Union in terms of their ambition for their country. They only respect one thing, and that is strength. And that we learned from Ronald Reagan. Peace through strength works. I lost this one. Let's see if I can get into it again. There we go. The Bulwark talked about the situation on the with Ukraine aid, talking about the aid finally getting through. And they talk about how J.D. Vance, who is opposed to this aid package, said that the math alone spells Ukraine's defeat. They called it an absurd argument. Taken at face value, it would mean that Ukraine should have surrendered in the first hour of Vladimir Putin's invasion, when Russia's manpower advantage was already well known. In fact, Ukrainians have repeatedly demonstrated that they fight better and smarter. Yes, as Vance notes, Russia has nearly 4 times the population of Ukraine. But independent estimates find that Russia's total casualties have exceeded Ukraine's nearly 3-1, with a staggering 5-1 ratio for fatalities, reflecting the fact that Ukrainian wounded have better survival rates. No tranche of weapons can give Ukraine an easy path to victory, defined as the expulsion of all Russian troops from Ukrainian territory or the achievement of a position from which to negotiate a full Russian withdrawal. From the start of Russia's war in Ukraine in February 2022, reporting on the Ukrainian war effort has whiplashed between pessimistic and optimistic narratives. Ukraine is doomed. No, Ukraine is beating Russia. No, Russia is winning after all. We have now been in a pessimistic phase for the last 5 or 6 months, coinciding with the standoff over aid to Ukraine in Congress. But while sober realism is warranted, defeatism is not. And I had seen several people kind of crunch these numbers. Yes, Russia has a much larger population than Ukraine. Russia also has a much larger country to secure than Ukraine. They have a much larger navy to maintain, most of which cannot be deployed or engaged in Ukraine. They have borders to protect. They have facilities to watch over. They have enormous amounts of territory to protect, which means that they cannot dedicate all of their money and resources to fighting Ukraine. In fact, Russia's, I think it was 2022 total defense budget was $75 billion equivalent in 2022. This one aid package alone is what was it, 85% of that, 80% of that? This is what it's going to take. This tiny country, we are focusing so much resources into a small area, and every dollar that goes into Ukraine can be turned around and spent on fighting the war. They don't have to worry about millions of square miles of territory that's along China's border. They don't have to worry about islands that are near Japan. They don't have to worry about the borders on the Baltics or anything like that. But it is still, that doesn't make it easy. So that's where things stand on U.S. aid. And boy, that was actually quite the long run of stuff I was talking about there. Ram Ranch states, I really hope they don't get to Ocheretyne. It's a wonderful town. I'm glad to know that. I have obviously never been there, but it's pretty rough over there right now. We'll get to that in a bit. From the Institute for the Study of War, they touch on a whole bunch of stuff here, and I want to kind of touch on the same things here and talk about them individually here. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu highlighted ongoing Russian offensive operations near Chasiv Yar, Avdiivka, and Donetsk City, and announced Russia's intent to intensify its strike campaign to disrupt Ukrainian logistics. However, this looks to be more to deflect attention away from the other problems that Russia's having here. Shoigu also discussed ongoing Russian military reforms during his April 23 Ministry of Defense Collegium address, cloaking ongoing expansion efforts in an information operation meant to falsely frame all Russian military activity as inherently defensive and responsive to supposed NATO aggression. This argument always floors me because NATO has never been aggressive. Nobody joins NATO by NATO soldiers stomping into their country and killing everybody. People join NATO because they want to join NATO. They join NATO because they have a very dangerous enemy that is right down their doorstep and breathing down their neck. Iran's Supreme National Security Council secretary traveled to St. Petersburg to attend the 12th Russian International Security Summit, showing greater ties between Iran and Russia, and the clear indication that the big four, that they're working together, are increasing their ties. Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia. And the more they work together, the more dangerous they can become. I'm going to kind of quickly scroll down here. Moldovan authorities confiscated over $1 million from Kremlin-linked Moldovan opposition politicians at Chisinau Airport on the night of April 22nd to 23rd, and the opposition politicians likely intended to use that money to bribe protesters and voters. There is a small but very vocal pro-Russian contingent over there in Moldova. And there's certainly plenty of opportunity for that in that poor country to bribe people to come out and flood the streets on their behalf. more blocking of virtual private networks in Russia. And the Ukrainian drone strikes and recent flooding in Russia have reportedly brought weekly Russian oil refining to an 11-month low, although the decrease in refining output has so far been marginal. So, yes, it's low, but there's lots more work to do to get rid of even more of the refining capacity over there. Russia, after basically destroying much of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, I believe it was DTEC has reported 80% of their generating capacity is destroyed, and the other much smaller energy company, was it Ukrenergo maybe, has reported that 100% of their generating capacity is destroyed. So Russia may be shifting focus to military targets such as logistics, transportation, infrastructure, and military storage facilities. Think what they could have done if they had actually been targeting those from the beginning, like they should have been to prosecute a war. Thankfully, they didn't. All right, let's move on to the news out of Ukraine itself. President Zelensky said on April 24th that Ukraine has precise intelligence information that Russia is preparing to disrupt a global peace summit set to take place in Switzerland in June. But they didn't give details on what they thought they were going to do to disrupt it. So that's something to keep an eye on, but it's another month and a half out. This is controversial. The Ukrainian government has banned sending passports to military-age Ukrainian men abroad, which means that if they want to get their passport updated, they got to come right back into Ukraine itself and cannot go to a consulate or embassy away. Ukraine has been working on covering their, taking care of their corruption problems. They've been working on it for years. They're actually making tremendous progress in joining the European Union by rooting out corruption across the country. Ukraine's Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office will request the arrest of Agriculture Minister Mykola Sulsky with an alternative option of 200 million hryvnias or $5 million of bail. He is accused of illegally appropriating Ukrainian state-owned land worth Sorry about that. State-owned land worth 291 million hryvnias or $7.3 million, and attempting to seize another plot worth an additional 190 million hryvnias or $4.8 million. So again, they're rooting out this corruption and gradually and taking it on head on is what they're really doing. They have also frozen the assets of the former head of the Supreme Court, Vesvolod Niziez, I think is how you pronounce it, after he failed to pay a fine over an illegally received gift. You better pay your fines or they're going to come after you because they're rooting out the corruption. They're working on it. Ukraine's secret police equivalent, the SBU, suspects Metropolitan of Kremlin-linked church, a Kremlin-linked Man, I can't talk tonight. A Kremlin-linked church of leaking information about Ukrainian forces. Metropolitan Arseny, who served in the Svatohirsk Lavra in Donetsk Oblast, allegedly told parishioners the coordinates of Ukrainian military checkpoints in the Kramatorsk district in Donetsk Oblast during a liturgy, according to an investigation. So basically, he's leaking information that he shouldn't be leaking in church. There are reports that more Patriot systems are on their way to Ukraine for sure, he says. The last I heard, they think they had a line on 4 of them that were maybe going to be able to arrive, and they are asking for further, of course. They asked for 7 initially, and I believe it was 25 in total. Ukraine's parliament passed a bill on April 24th, raising the number of personnel of the state border guard by 15,000. Now, border guard is kind of a misnomer here. These are active combat troops in this situation. So, yes, they may be border guards, but look at the border they're guarding. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry, showing some of their own, defense manufacturing capability, have delivered 40 of their Ukrainian-made Kozak 5 armored vehicles to the 225th Separate Assault Battalion, giving their soldiers some better protection from shrapnel and bullets during their combat missions. Whew. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to what's going on in Russia. We have got a ton of stuff we're going through today. From the Defense Intelligence update from the UK, according to independent Russian media group Mediazona on March 2024, Russian military courts sentenced a record high 684 members of the Russian armed forces for desertion. This is an increase compared to September 2022. And to be honest, the funny thing is that they're basically suspending the sentences and sending them right back to the front lines. So you might get accused, you might even get convicted, but they're just going to bundle you right back up and send you right back into the front lines. According to Bloomberg, Russia is going to supply China with cheaper gas compared to the European market, at least through 2027. This indicates that Russia won't make as much money on it, but they'll still get their revenue coming in. And as long as they're making more on it than it costs them to actually get the gas pulled out of the ground, it's still better for them than nothing. Still, that indicates more of the growing ties between Russia and China. Their oil and gas revenues will be almost double that of the same month last year, with only a slight drop recorded when compared to March 2024 overall, as Reuters states. Kind of working on some of Russia's internal problems here. A Russian man has been jailed for 10 years over railway sabotage. He has got 10 years for setting fire to a railway relay cabinet in Russia's Transbaikal region. This one caught my eye as not unexpected, because we see plenty of this type of thing happening on both sides. These are images of President Biden and President Zelensky appearing in Ramenskoye near Moscow. These are apparently tombstones, and they're calling them the American president, Biden, the sponsor of war, and the Ukrainian president, an enemy of the people. Maybe if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine, they wouldn't have an enemy of the people. I'm going to get this a little larger here. This is rehearsal for the victory parade on Palace Square. I'm just going to kind of observe that there's aspects of this picture that should look very familiar. Just the symbol is changed so far. But this is their rehearsal for their victory parade right here. Drone attacks struck infrastructure in Russia's Voronezh and Lipetsk Oblast, reportedly hitting an oil refinery and an industrial zone. According to Russian telegram channels, they do report 26,000 cubic meters of Russian fuel was lost as Ukrainian drones struck 2 oil depots in Smolensk. They also report that there was another one in another region. I think I've got this here. I'll take a look in just a moment here. But there was a series of explosions near Rezdorovo, about 10 kilometers from Smolensk. And then, of course, plenty of indications of burning oil. And as Jason J. Smart, journalist from the Kiev Post, states, why is it that Russian oil refineries are so beautiful when in flames? I actually pulled this for the video of the burning refinery there. Then there is Deputy Defense Minister Timur Ivanov, who was detained on April 23rd on suspicion of receiving a bribe. And the report is that the bribe was so large that they couldn't overlook it, though, as we know in Russia, somebody who's this much on the take likely has Vladimir Putin's blessing until they don't. So it seems like there might have been a reason they wanted to take him down a peg. He's facing 15 years in prison for a large-scale bribe. According to Dmitry at War Translated, he's been robbing the Russian population with permission from authorities for decades, and he belongs to the Russian system. The real reasons behind his arrest are, as he says, more complex. He also went into a little bit more detail on this, talking about the various places he would, and then he adds that without Putin's sanction or permission, such an arrest was impossible. He's one of Shoigu's 12 deputies. He was responsible for buildings and structures for troops, the construction of fortifications, and the restoration of occupied regions, as well as for medical support for the Russian armed forces. So this is a man that is highly connected and would have been one of the effectively Shoigu's inner circle. He would have been receiving all these bribes with Vladimir Putin's personal blessing. Another person was also arrested in the case. Sergei Borodin was apparently involved in taking these bribes. And it appears that the Russian, they call them Z channels, basically the propaganda channels, started talking about the problems with the long-term construction of the things that Timur was supposed to be doing. The housing for the military, some of it's been 80 to 90% completed, but not finished for a decade or more. They talk about several locations like this, even with double glazed windows installed, 10 years, no progress. And all these things are just kind of, it's clear that whatever he did, he's being taken down on purpose. And the coordinated talking points are out there. A lot of the conversation that keeps popping up is how, Ukraine is the one that's oppressing Christian religions and Russia is defending Christian religions. Russian Orthodox priest Dmitry Safronov was suspended for 3 years following his overseeing the funeral of late opposition leader Alexei Navalny. So if you even preside over the funeral of somebody who's not in favor, they're taking you down. This report is from the occupied territories of Ukraine. The Ministry of Internal Affairs is now in our church building. They cut off all the crosses. Only the Russian Orthodox Church or Ukrainian Orthodox Church Moscow Patriarchate can function there. All others, Catholics, Protestants, and the Independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine are outlawed. Moving on to Sevastopol, just kind of briefly touching on this. There are 3 large landing ships that are still there undergoing repairs, as well as a Tarantul-class patrol ship. The things that are left, by and large, in Sevastopol are things that need to be repaired, or the absolute minimum for minimal protection for the anchorage there. They used to have some submarines at some of these docks, and now they've got small, like an anti-submarine ship and a minesweeper docked at those same locations. They are reporting that they're moving their ships around pretty much on a regular basis just to fool and prevent the direct attack of any of their ships there, if they can pull it off. Obviously, that's going to depend on exactly how much Ukraine is able to respond to the changing situation. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front here. And I've got a bunch of stuff here. I'm going to try and burn through it pretty quick, but understand that as I was going through things today, a bunch of these things kind of popped up at different points, and they may overlap in some ways. So they might seem a little bit disjointed as we go through the international portion. Poland is reporting that ready to help Ukraine get its military-aged men back. This is related to the passport stuff we talked about earlier here, where the Ukrainian men that fled the country will no longer be able to update their passport. Poland is saying they're willing to help out pushing those guys back across the border so they can get their passports renewed or otherwise deal with their service obligations. The drone coalition led by the UK and Latvia has collected over 500 million euros to purchase drones for Ukraine. Canada. Reuters reports that Canada has granted Airbus a waiver against sanctions on Russian titanium. They apparently are not able to build their engines and equipment, because engines are where you typically use titanium on a passenger jet. And they don't have enough titanium to be able to do it without Russian titanium, so they're allowing them to get them anyway. Ukraine received another 1.5 billion euros from the EU. This is, by the way, I've got it right here because this is just showing that the U.S. isn't the only one that is getting the money out for Ukraine. The Europeans have actually done more overall than the U.S. has at this point in time, and they're still opening their pockets to try and give Ukraine every resource they can. A North Korean economic delegation is on its way to Iran on April 24th. Once again, this is the continuing integration of these. I guess Johnson called it this evil axis of these four countries here. They are trying to create a situation where they can challenge the West, and if we're not careful, they might be able to do it. According to Ukraine's UN envoy, Russia uses sexual violence as a weapon of war. There's reports of sexual violence being performed on over 50% of detainees that have suffered various aspects of that. So it's clear that Russia's not exactly holding to the Geneva Convention on the treatment for prisoners. Ukraine and the United States are in talks to set up joint production of Patriot systems. Now, this is being pushed by Ukraine. It is not being pushed by the United States. I have this sneaking suspicion that the United States might allow them to do production of the interceptor missiles, but may not go so far as to allow the production of the system itself. I'm not sure, but either way, it's at least it's in the works. And to be honest, they got to be able to produce their own air defense missiles as well anyway. Otherwise, they won't be able to protect their country. France has proposed to the European Union to impose sanctions against Russian disinformation and interference operations worldwide. This would be very targeted to try and knock the disinformation regime back that Russia has been putting out. Sweden initially decommissioned this natural gas-fired power plant, and they just realized that with the changes in the world situation here, that they probably better be prepared for a potential conflict. So instead of decommissioning this power plant, they are looking at reviewing their plans to ensure their energy security. So that plant may not be dismantled or removed from service, or at least kept into some kind of an operational state, just in case. The German opposition spoke with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to try and exert some more pressure on Olaf Scholz to get him to deliver Taurus missiles to Ukraine. But Olaf Scholz flatly stated he would not be changing his position in the matter. So the United Kingdom went ahead and loaded up some Paveway 4 bombs and sent them to Ukraine. These are the high-tech laser-guided precision bombs that have been in Royal Air Force service since 2008. They're basically a 500-pound bomb with a guidance kit. I mentioned in the previous video that Poland was kind of agitating to get some nuclear weapons from the West stationed on their territory. NATO said they have no plans to expand the number of allied countries with nuclear weapons at this point in time. There have been issues getting additional Patriot systems moving towards Ukraine. A lot of these countries are reluctant to part with their Patriots because they are concerned that they'll need to have them for their own security. Unfortunately, very justified position for them to be taking, considering the hostile country on their east side. Lithuania forked over M577 armored personnel carriers to Ukraine, already in the country and probably going to be in use in short order here. Now, Sweden has been watching the ships that have been flowing by lately, and they've noted that some of the fishing vessels that have been going around have had antennas and masts that are not typical for fishing vessels. So they believe, the Swedish naval chief has stated, that they believe Moscow is spying through their shadow fleets. I would be shocked if they weren't. The largest defense package to support Ukraine from Britain, totaling over £500 million, includes long-range Storm Shadow missiles, other types of missiles, hundreds of armored vehicles, watercraft, and ammunition. That's another package that's being set up by the Brits to send to Ukraine. And the U.S. has noticed that China's been getting a little extra buddy-buddy with Russia these days. And so they're setting up a package of sanctions for Chinese banks that are aiding Russian military actions. That's under consideration. Will it happen? I would say it's unlikely at this point in time. But the threat might be enough to get China to back off, at least less visibly. According to Russia's ombudsman for children, Maria Lvova-Belova, Russia and Ukraine held their face-to-face negotiations for the first time and have arranged for 29 children to move to Ukraine and 19 to Russia. Considering the source, I'm going to just put it this way. Treat this with a grain of salt. Maria Lvova-Belova is known for stating things on the record which have tenuous relationships with the truth. And just in case you wondered if Russia was in fact at war with the West, at war with the United States, Russian hackers targeted a wastewater treatment plant in Indiana on Friday. And considering what we've been seeing as far as the cybersecurity situation over in Russia and the effectiveness of messing with their systems over there, on top of the flooding that's also been created over there, it's the civilian infrastructure here in the U.S. had better step up their IT security game, or they're going to find themselves on the receiving end of things that they don't want to receive. Let's move on to the situation on the front lines here. The big news here is Novobakhmutivka right here. Let's see. Do I have it pulled up? I do not. Bear with me a second here. The big news over here is Novobakhmutivka, which has been captured by the Russians. Now, my understanding, after looking at multiple sources, is that it was a situation where the Ukrainians realized they really had no chance of effectively defending this position here. So they pulled back to more defensive lines. Yes, that is effectively a small retreat, but in the end result is still that Russia has taken the village of Novobakhmutivka. It's not a large village, it's not a big one, but it hurts to see any of it, anything lost that way. Now there's fighting in Solovyove, just to the west of Novobakhmutivka there, so that's continuing to be an issue. And you can see here, Ocheretyne. The report is that the Russians have managed to capture much of the city center, with just the outskirts being in Ukrainian hands so far. The Ukraine control map says it's not all bad news, though. They report that the Ukrainian forces have advanced westward at Krinky towards Kozachi-Lehery. That would be this map right here, and expanded their ability to, they basically expanded the gray zone to the west. Looks like maybe another couple of 100 meters. So that would be right about in this area right here. Null Reports talks about Robotyne here. Geolocated footage shows that Russian forces managed to take control over the eastern part of the trench fortifications south of Robotyne. Now, heavy fighting going on, etc. Everything's changing, sometimes by the hour. Let's take a quick look at the deep state map here, kind of pull back and zoom in on Robotyne here. This was territory that was hard fought over. And let me see, can we get the trench lines on here? They've changed how this map works, so bear with me here. There we go. They didn't do a good job of this one. So there's, if I remember correctly, there is a trench line somewhere right along in here. Maybe even this set of trees right here. And the report is that the Russians managed to capture the eastern part of that trench line. So that is not good news, but the fighting is ongoing, and it's not necessarily a surprise because Russia has been dumping everything they can into the Robotyne area. What they've not managed to do is actually take any of the center of the village itself. It's still in the gray zone, which means the fighting in that area is pretty intense. This is going to stay further information on the situation in Novobakhmutivka and Ocheretyne. They've got a little bit more detail on the map. You can see effectively the captured area right here in the middle of town. This whole advance still bothers the daylights out of me. This is sticking a whole lot of Russian neck out there. And unfortunately, the fact that Ukraine hasn't lopped it off yet tells me they don't have the resources to do so in the area. Hopefully the support package will get there fast. They'll be able to do something about that, because right now this area is vulnerable. And the Russians should know it. And the fact that they're still pushing in this long, thin neck here, that's worrisome. And that's the situation on the front lines. Now, I got some interesting extras here. I've got a follow-up from a previous video. And I've also got a little bit of information about U.S. politics for a little bit that's not related to the war in Ukraine at all. Or there might be something in there, but it's not going to be a big thing. It's just more to talk about domestic politics for a bit. So let's go ahead and get into the interesting extras. If you have questions for me that you'd like me to answer or try and find an answer for you, go ahead and pipe up right now. Now's the time to let me know, and I will be reading your comments. And Paul, I think you are correct that Europe has promised more but not delivered as much. But that's mostly in war materiel. If you look at the dollar signs that they've been putting into Ukraine, I think overall the dollars are higher. I'll have to look at the charts I've seen on it, but either way, the Europeans are definitely stepping up to the plate. Russian servicemen have started installing rear screens against FPV drones on their motorcycles. You can see here that the net is just intended to keep them from being plastered from the backside by a drone, because that's where most of them attack from. This would do nothing for a drone coming from the front or the top, but if you're moving along at a fast pace, the drone's going to have to try and catch you from behind. And if they can keep that moving, that'll be pretty effective to prevent drones from attacking the motorcycle drivers, unless it touches off the explosives. If it touches off the explosives, the odds are that either the shrapnel is going to impact the back of the driver's head or back, or the concussion of it will knock him off the bike. So it might stop a drone from getting there, but if it also touches off the munition, it may not actually work for the purpose. Ukrainian Alia Nasarova has entered the Guinness World Records as the owner of the longest hair in the world. That's just fun. Just fun. A little less fun here. Ethnic Armenians who lost their homes in Nagorno-Karabakh worry about Azerbaijan plans for another war. And Azerbaijan's been making some pretty bellicose statements. They're kind of getting hot under the collar for maybe some more attacking into Armenia. This area right here is a powder keg. The wrong spark and this place will go up like pow instantaneously. A year ago, Russian troops blew up the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, and the nature in the area has started to revive. Now they're talking about exactly what they want to do about it. There are signs of revival of nature in the area. We've seen some pictures of grass and other small plants showing up. There'll be trees eventually. There's animals already in those areas. Some people are saying they should turn it into a nature preserve instead. They're predicting that willow trees will be there, up to 10 meters tall. That the area is quickly restoring its natural state, and they see potentially using it for green energy. May also attract some foreign investment in environmental projects. But the arguments for putting the hydroelectric power station are also quite robust. Almost 600,000 hectares of land were irrigated with water from the Kakhovka Sea. And with no irrigation, corn, vegetables, and watermelons will not grow there, which would mean that they would lose a lot of their agricultural potential. There is the possibility that some of it may turn into a semi-desert, which might happen depending on the exact environmental conditions that show up in the area. No reservoir means there may not be enough water for the region's enterprises. And even though the dam itself only provided 1% of Ukrainian electricity, it was a balance to the entire energy system, providing reliable power when other sources might have to be pulled off. So interesting to see the debate back and forth on the Kakhovka Reservoir. Andrew Perpetua is an analyst who's been tracking the Ukraine war quite closely and has done a lot of the open source intelligence work that's been out there. Very reliable source overall, and he's commented a little bit here. The more you zoom out, he says, the more the situation looks worse for Russia. Their long-term prospects are really very bad. But when you zoom into details, it flips and Russia looks like it is in a better position. The trick is balancing the two perspectives. If you stay too focused on one or the other, you lose perspective. Both are important. The short-term advantages Russia has must be actively mitigated, and you must also understand that they are short-term. If you don't take these issues seriously, bad things will happen. But at the same time, they shouldn't be taken too strongly as to imply they will last forever, because they cannot and will not. All planning at every level, from government down to volunteers, should be built around balancing the long and short-term realities. To put it simply, you can look at the situation going on in Ocheretyne, where the Ukrainians had to pull back from Novobakhmutivka, and say, well, clearly the Russians have a huge advantage there. And right there at this moment in time, yeah, they do. They absolutely do. But you look at the larger situation on material production, GDP, the economic indicators, the ability to wage this war long term, and it looks a lot worse for Russia at that point in time. They don't really have the manufacturing capacity to really keep up the rate. So a lot of things to look at and a lot of things to think of, but remember that if you're lost in the weeds, you're missing the big picture. And if you're looking only at the big picture, you're never going to see what's going on at the smallest levels. Jason J. Smart listed 14 characteristics of fascism. I'm not going to go through it right here, but I thought it was an interesting read. So I'll just drop the link right here for you to review at a later time. But he added this picture, all on board, ahead, victory over Russian fascism awaits us. And of course, it's a cat, and I couldn't resist a good cat picture. I'm going to play this, but I have to leave it muted because it is loud with music that I'm sure is copyrighted. So I'm just going to say, pay attention to the daughter's reaction at around the 30-second mark. This warrior dad surprises teenager on her birthday. Showed up in a bear costume. Danced with his daughter a little bit. And then showed took off the mask. Isn't that just amazing? That look of shock and excitement and then right in for the hug. As they say, this is what Ukraine is fighting for. And in that same vein, this is two people who are evacuating from Russia into Ukraine, from Russian-occupied Kherson to Ukraine-controlled part of the country. They contacted Red Cross volunteers to help them, but they were both elderly. Mrs. Gana is blind. Mr. Volodymyr can barely walk. They're an elderly couple from the Russian-occupied region who are going to Ukraine. They needed help crossing the 2-kilometer-wide pedestrian zone at the border crossing point. Red Cross volunteers helped the woman first, but she refused to go any further without her husband. It was only after she felt his hand in hers and recognized him by touch that she allowed the volunteers to proceed. And that's everything about Ukraine for today. I do have a few things I want to touch on as well, and a question to answer. But before I do, Ram Ranch, my opinion on the Russians getting a Leopard 2A6. To be brutally honest, they're not going to learn anything that they wouldn't know already about the Leopard 2A6. Even if they got their hands on it at this point in time, they'd have to be able to produce the necessary hardware. And unless they can analyze it to the point where they identify a weakness that isn't already known for the Leopard 2A6, they really aren't going to gain any military value out of it in the end beyond a trophy. They might be able to see how much better the Western equipment is, or they might be able to see what's going on with it. But the key with the Leopard 2A6 and the key with most of this equipment is not the equipment. There's no Wunderwaffe here. The key is the people. A well-trained, capable crew, even in a lesser tank, will take on and kill a crew in a lesser trained or lesser capable crew in a more advanced tank. And we've seen it repeatedly in Ukraine. That doesn't mean it's always going one way, but that's where the real rubber hits the road. Western tanks can kill Russian tanks. Russian tanks can kill Western tanks. The crew is what really makes the difference. Okay, I was asked in the previous one about further information on the attacks, the response attacks from Israel into Iran. I have found no real further information beyond that there was an attempt to attack facilities around a nuclear facility in Iran. The damage was minimal, at least according to reports. But and they actually are, like they always claim. They always claim that the damage was caused by their own interceptor missiles blowing up, not by the actual attack. But overall, it sounds like the damage was minimal, and they believe that rather than being some kind of a massive external attack, it may have been an infiltration attack, which, to be honest, if I was Iran, I'd be more concerned about an infiltration attack because it means that my security systems are compromised. And that would scare the pants off me. In that same vein, Israel has refocused their attention back to what they were doing, trying to get their job done. They have now advised, or as they say, invited the residents of Rafah to evacuate and are preparing for the assault. So, in this case, they're trying to evacuate as many civilians as they can before they actually begin the assault into the city of Rafah. We'll see how that turns out in the end. And that's pretty much everything there. I'm going to go into some American domestic politics. But so if those who want to bail out at this point in time, thank you for being here. I do appreciate you being here, every single one of you. And I want you to know how much it means to me. I appreciate it. And I don't think any words will be able to actually put it into perspective. And that ends the Ukraine-related portion. I'm going to move into U.S. domestic politics for just a few minutes here. The trial of Donald Trump is continuing apace. And for all the jokers out there, I believe it's David Pecker is giving his testimony that he was a long-time, basically news fixer for Donald Trump. They used money and influence to bury stories. They actually had a direct relationship with the tabloid The Inquirer, where they would deliberately publish misleading information, false information, outright against other people that were running against Donald Trump. So we've got some examples of that. This piece about Ted Cruz's father being linked to the JFK assassination, entirely a whole fabrication by the Trump campaign, put into The Inquirer. There's a bunch of other ones. They actually called Ben Carson a noted neurosurgeon and tremendous talent in the field. They put out stories that he was being called Ben the Butcher and things like that because he was killing patients and things like that. And they said Marco Rubio had a cocaine habit. All of these were planted stories, all against his opponents, deliberately intending to destroy their reputations. No, destroying the reputation of your opponents is nothing new in politics. But this type of catch and kill, where they would kill negative stories against Trump by buying them outright and then preventing them from coming to light, and then floating fake stories, not even ones with a modicum of evidence supporting them. They would put those out instead. So that's the trial, what's going on in the trial with Donald Trump over there. I still remain firmly convinced that the trial of Donald Trump is effectively lawfare. They're trying to break him by keeping him tied up in court. The thing is, though, that if there's an actual crime here, and I'm not convinced there is or is not, I'm not going to make that call. But if there's an actual crime here, he needs to be punished, just like anybody else. And that's the concern on that situation there. Understand, though, there were no people with clean hands over there in the Trump campaign back in 2016 and in 2020. Something that should scare the pants off of the Donald Trump campaign. This is the candidate results from the Pennsylvania statewide presidential primary. You'll note that he received 83.4% of the vote, with 16.6% of the vote voting for Nikki Haley, who's been out of the race for over a month at this point. Yes, he still wins the whole state, but look at the Democrat side. Joe Biden walked away with 87.9% of the vote, and 6.4 and 5 voted for Dean Phillips, who's dropped out of the campaign, and some write-ins, 5.6%. That means that there's a significant gap between those who are excited about Donald Trump in Pennsylvania than there are that are excited about Joe Biden. His total vote count of 790,000 is well below Joe Biden's 941,000 votes in here. So there's a significant enthusiasm gap, and this should be really concerning the Trump campaign at this point in time. Basically, he's going to have to pull those Haley voters into the fold. Otherwise, he doesn't stand a chance. In 2020, Trump lost the state by 82,000 votes, which is less than Haley pulled in this campaign, in this primary. So he's really cutting a fine edge here. This one I wanted to talk about for a couple of reasons. Number one, I only have, when you run all the sources, they all come back to one source, and that concerns me. But what was reported to have been said is even more concerning. And let me see if I can pull that up. The judge in this man's case, this is a man who was an amateur gunsmith, and he builds the occasional gun and messes around with gunsmithing, that type of thing. He was brought into a courtroom, and when they tried to bring up the Second Amendment as a defense for his actions, the judge reportedly stated, "Do not bring the Second Amendment into this courtroom. It doesn't exist here. So you can't argue Second Amendment. This is New York." Did she say that? I don't have direct proof, and I'm looking for it. If somebody sees the actual proof of this beyond just another person posting the exact same information that leads back to the red state or anything else like that, this one, if a judge cannot make this case, you cannot say the Second Amendment doesn't exist and doesn't hold sway. It's literally in our Constitution. And that's my concern here, is that this judge in New York may have been overstepping what he could do. And I'll end off right here. Now, before I do that, I'm going to go up here to Paul. He says, Donald Trump does need to build a coalition for the general, so Trump and Johnson flipped Ukraine aid to make a coalition possible. I do wonder, Paul, if that might be why the switch on Ukraine aid. It ticks off his base, yes, but it might bring others into the fold. And The concern I have is that we have got, for probably the first time in my life, three, well, I'll go with two people who should be nowhere near the reins of power that are running for the office. Two people that have shown a stunning lack of uh, discretion, decorum, capability in these things. For instance, here is Joe Biden reading his teleprompter.
Imagine what we can do next. 4 more years. Pause. 4 more years. Pause.
4 more years. Pause. He read pause off his teleprompter. And the thing is that I don't think either one is an innocent lamb at all. I think Joe Biden has grown fat and rich on 50 years of public office. I think Donald Trump is a corrupt individual. I think they're both corrupt in many ways. I think that Donald Trump has likely committed multiple felonies. I think it is likely that Joe Biden has as well. Opinion. I'm not making legal judgments on any of it right here. But all we need out of this is somebody who is principled and capable and not insane and not crazy and not losing their marbles. Either one of these guys could be either party could be walking away with this if they just brought somebody to the table who wasn't this. And that is what makes me fear for my country. So I don't know what you guys think. I do see Paul saying he agrees with some of the things I'm saying here, but we're looking at a situation that scares me. No, scares is the wrong word. Troubles me deeply. I'm not scared because I have other items of faith to keep me from being depressed or negative about this. But it is so troubling to see our nation devolving into a situation where the best that we can get to surface, the cream, are these two men. Now, I've looked at RFK Jr. He's another liberal Democrat. And there's a variety of issues with him as well. I'm also looking at other options. I have not done a full study on this, but all we needed was one man of principles. I'm not even going to make a call on who that one man would have been. Pretty much anybody else had run on either side, and they'd be walking away with this election today. Why do we focus on the letter in front of the guy's name instead of who the man is? Why do we focus on party over country? Why do we focus on tribalism instead of patriotism? The more they divide us, the harder it is for us to be amazing as a country. And yet, I have optimism for the future. I believe better days are ahead. We'll make it through. There's going to be a lot of rough challenges, no matter who wins and who loses. But in the end, I am optimistic that America, the United States of America, and American people and America as a concept will make it through, because we are tough people. We are capable people. We're smart people as a whole. No other country in the world is anything like America. And that's everything for today. And I hope you appreciate that little extra on the end. I don't have enough time to do a recording. Yeah, or woman. Yes, Lucille, thank you very much. I was just looking at the options here we have right now. But I hope you don't mind me going on about U.S. politics for a little bit. I don't have time right now to actually record a separate video for these things. So I appreciate you guys accepting that I might do a little bit of this at the end of the video. And I will try to keep it at the end so that I can talk without having the Ukraine parts of it interrupted by U.S. internal politics. Well, except for this time where most of the information was about U.S. aid. But overall, I do appreciate it, and I hope you also appreciate it. And if you want to see more of my commentary, absolutely let me know. Put it in the comments. Give me the old thumbs up if you appreciated it as well. I love you all. Thank you again. Paul, thank you for that reference. That's high praise indeed. So thank you. You all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.